Yeah, yeah. So I think it was really very interesting, and also interesting, and a recurring theme throughout the our deliberations since yesterday and coming in today is the fact that addressing these issues of crisis preparedness and response, we're dealing with multiple stakeholders and each having a heavy weight of responsibility in their own right. So yes, media, and even within media, the different components of media, but then we also have various components of the response mechanism and even the measures that are to be taken in advance. And one of the more important partners, stakeholders in the process, is the International Federation of the Red Cross or Red Crescent. Globally, I mean, their reputation has been part of the whole framework, say, crises and emergencies and disasters is is very highly regarded. So we're very pleased to have in our presence today to present on common alerting protocols and hazards, Mr. Horace Glaze, who is Disaster Management Coordinator at the IFRC Americas Caribbean Cluster Jamaica office. Previously, he acted in the capacity of Deputy Director General at the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, ODPEM, where he had oversight for the operational and strategic direction of the organization's technical arm. Prior to the position of deputy, he served as the ODPM's Senior Director for Preparedness and Emergency Operations Division, a position he held for 12 years. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Urban and Regional Planning from UTEC, Jamaica, and served as Urban Planner Parish Disaster Coordinator in the St. James Parish Council, supported development control and spearheaded the coordination of disaster risk management activities for the parish. Much more we can say about the work that he has done over the years, but no more from me. I want him to the top here now for to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, all good afternoon. Good afternoon as well to those online. I, I, I know we are a little bit behind, so I'll just get straight into it for you. But first of all, I just want to thank the team from the CBU and the MIU for MIC for this invitation to the IFRC. We're certainly pleased, and I personally am indeed pleased to be a part of this group and to share our experiences with you. So again, thank you very much. And, you know, I'll go straight into this important topic of hazard messaging and the common alerting protocol, commonly referred to as CAP. Who has this? No. Right. So I'll start by just giving you a quick, sorry about that, quick um, overview as to what you may be, some person may be wondering who is the IFRC. You hear a lot about the Red Cross, right? You know, and they are easily recognizable, of course, by a Red Cross. But straight up, the IFRC is the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Red Crescent, of course, because we have national societies who are in countries that are sort of sensitive when it comes to the use of the cross for religious reasons, and so they use the Red Crescent. But it's the same organization. So we are really the secretariat for all 191 national societies across the globe. We operate on our fundamental principles, 7 fundamental principles, which you should be able to see. Let's go back. Back, right. um, humanity, impartiality, neutrality, unity, independence, voluntary service. You know, the hallmark of what we do is volunteerism, and of course, universality. Right? So, as I mentioned, we operate from 191 national societies. When we play, the Red Cross plays what we term as an auxiliary role to the government. So we are neither, government, non-government, but we are also sort of a part of how the government operates, in that we're auxiliary to the government in providing support in many different areas. Common areas for us, of course, is disaster response, but we also provide support in many other areas such as health. You'll commonly know the Red Cross for first aid. We operate in other areas of climate change, of course, in the education sector as well, and other areas where we are currently engaged in. Right? So globally, we operate from 5 regional offices. So my regional office here is the regional office of the Americas. So all of the North America, Central, South, and the Caribbean. And we have other regional offices across the globe, and have also representation offices in the New York, Brussels, and Addis Ababa. Right. So risk and the media, right? How do we see this? What sort of relationship and key roles, certainly from our expectation? Of course, sharing information at the national and at national and local level is where we see a big role for this, especially in the work that we do, working in communities daily and in disaster response. Building awareness and the concern about threats and providing guidance on how people cope with disasters and with disaster risk. Our work takes us in communities, especially those that are most vulnerable, not just in emergency, but helping to increase knowledge, helping to provide other humanitarian assistance, because there's constant need on the ground outside of emergency situations. Of course, reaching people through many different communication channels is always very critical in our operations, and especially in time-sensitive situations such as an emergency. Enable two-way communication and relay information about the situation on the ground, right? It's just as the government and other entities that are in response rely on the media to be able to share information and also share about what we're doing on the ground, to encourage support and to encourage others to be a part of the process. Next slide. So CAP, the Common Alerting Protocol. We are not experts on the technology or experts on CAP itself, but certainly naturally because of what we do, we are heavily involved in the use of CAP and in the advocacy surrounding CAP. But what are, what's the standards used for? And, it communicates key emergency messages, right? Specifically, what it is, where it is, how soon it is it, how bad is it, and how should or what should people do, right? So that's the intent of a CAP message when we speak about it in emergency response. It's a standard format that's used across emergency responders and other persons involved in emergency response, such as for your previous session spoke a lot about warning centers. So the warning centers, other forecasting entities, and so on, heavily utilize the standard operating format. Has been doing the rounds for several years now, and still in trying to be promulgated more in various countries around the world. And there are countries, even within the Caribbean, are at different stages of implementation of this protocol. Now, I'm going to show just a short video of this. We should be able to start the video, the back, and just hover over the slide. Audio. Audio now. So just a short video as to what the CAP is. I would say CAP, if you don't remember anything, just remember three specific things. One, it's a standard format for creating emergency messages. So it would be common across all the various players in our country who are issuing alerts for various hazards. The big ones, medium-sized events, as well as the small emergency events in your communities. The second thing is the ability of CAP to be able to broadcast message across multiple platforms in the same at the same time, right? So it's one standard message. You have the ability to just put in this kind of format across multiple media formats. So it can go straight across the social media formats, to radio, television, all with one send. Right? One click of a button can be able to push to multiple hazards. And then the third thing is the ensuring that within country CAP, you have multiple users that are able to provide that service to the affected population and in a targeted way. So you can broadcast the messages to all of the country, to all communities right across the country, or you can target specific areas where that message, you require that message to be broadcast. Right? So it's simple. Right? Simple, extensive format for digital representation of warning messages. And of course, you enjoy these things. It's interoperable, going across the different platforms. It provides key facts that the population or the affected population should know. Right? Simple for implementation because it's using standard format. It's getting the same messages that our warning entities would normally utilize, such as your Met offices, your disaster offices. Same messages, but ensuring that it's now captured in this specific format. it's able to go across XML to be able to also provide additional usage for emergency responders and other users who can then convert that to other platforms that they may be utilizing. Of course, I mentioned it being able to target specific areas or several areas across the country and contextualize and actionable messages, right? Again, this all comes down to how the alerting entity, the disaster office, are utilizing the platform. Next slide. Right. The Alert Hub is an system or platform used by the International Federation of the Red Cross that utilizes the CAP technology and CAP formatting to aggregate messages. So for us, we are not an alerting entity as the Red Cross, but certainly our reach across the globe, we reach in countries to various vulnerable communities where we have volunteers right across the respective countries. It's, good practice for us to be able to then reach out to these communities once the messages are provided. So we depend heavily on the alerting authority to have the message in the CAP format, and then we are able to utilize the Alert Hub to push that messages to our Red Cross staff and volunteers across the country to have a wider reach of that messages reaching the vulnerable community. Right? Example of CAP as well is its ability to be used across the smartphone technology and specific to an alerting entity. So there are a few Caribbean countries now that are using what is called a CAP software. Many of you may use it, may actually have it on your phone now. I have it for a few of the countries and switch from time to time, because one of the challenges with it currently is that you're only able to download for one country at a time, but there are about 5 or 6 countries within the region that utilizes. And so, for example, Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, but on a single instrument, you can only download a specific country. But that specific app. There are other apps that also utilizes the CAP format. Right. Now, when it comes to key hazard messaging, emergency alerts, of course, are of no use, right? When we talk about key hazard messaging, when we talk about early warning systems, if the affected community is unable to appreciate what is required to be done in terms of their response to those key messages, or is unable to they have the capacity to even do what is required, then alerting and early warning almost comes to naught. If you send a message but it's not understood by the impacted community, or it's clearly understood but they don't have the ability to take those necessary actions that are required. Part of how the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement aids in this process is what we call our PAPE, or public awareness and public education messaging, where we have tailored messages across 13 hazards currently, right? A tool that's used to include guides on how the messages are contextualized. Doing this process, of course, with partners, the government, media, civil society, other humanitarian actors on the ground, and being able to tailor these messages to accompany your alerting messages that are issued by the alerting authority, or even tailoring the alerting messages itself where possible. So the affected community, or the potentially affected community, can better understand what the situation is and what sort of response would be required, of course, to save lives. Now, we also have what is called the IFRC What Now service, which provides digital access to these PAPE messages and key hazard messages in several different languages. Us being an international organization, we have several different languages in which we operate, but it provides an API allows messages across the IFRC and What's Now seamlessly integrated into the CAP system using that special formatting and linking to or alerting entities, and provides these messages across our social media platforms, and integrates it where possible, where we have arrangements with our media organizations into those other media formats as well. Right? So it's a website based. We train our National Society staff and volunteers on how to utilize the service and how they can provide these key messages to their communities to ensure that persons get these messages and are able to take action accordingly. Yes. Right. Thank you. Right. So we continue to utilize these services again, just because of the uniqueness of it in being able to pull from our local alerting entities, and through our network of staff and volunteers, being able to reach those persons in the community. Now, this is a varying implementation across the region, across the globe. The education process is continuing for both of the videos. You would have seen the Global Disaster Preparedness Center and Google, who are partners with the IFRC, as well as the Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs, USAID, in sort of spreading this across all our national societies. Last year, we had good support through that mechanism in reaching our 13 national societies. And for 4 of them specifically, we actually had PAPE workshops in country to, work with the government to re-examining some of the key alerting messages that they issue, and how we can better tailor them for the needs of the communities. Right. So I mentioned we have 13 countries in the Caribbean, the Dutch and the English in Caribbean, with Suriname being the only Dutch country. We have 2 offices, 2 locations, or cluster office based in Trinidad and Tobago, but we have staff represented here in Jamaica. And we work across the 13 countries to providing support. It's really English-speaking countries where you have the national societies for the Caribbean. We do have interaction support, cross exchanges with our overseas territories within the Caribbean. So we do work closely with them. They're a part of the network. They're a part of our regional training and capacity building. But of course, you would appreciate them being overseas territories. Their parent national societies are the British, the US, Netherlands, etc. And so they don't form really a part of the region because of where their home national society is. So separate and apart from the specific involvement in the use of CAP through that process, or what's now service, alert hub, etc., we are constantly working with our partners in the region. You had the UNESCO, the CTIC earlier, who we work closely with on the regional early warning system consortium. And what we constantly do with the countries within the Caribbean is through our national societies to work heavily on the ground, engaging communities, for capacity building, establishment of what we call community disaster response teams. Some persons may refer to them in some countries as CERTs, but more so about establishing early warning communities, working with them to not just appreciate the kind of hazards and what to do, but also providing training and to be able to better respond, be their own first responders, so to speak, in responding to emergencies. And of course, constantly pushing and utilizing, encouraging our staff and volunteers to introduce the PAPE tools and others to be integrated into the process. You would have probably heard about early warning for all. I'll touch on that a little later in the slide again, but specifically also utilizing this global initiative as part of our vehicle for advocacy and implementation of CAP and early warning systems in general across our 30 national societies. And of course, our continued support to the government and humanitarian actors in country around multi-hazard early warning systems. And of course, early warning, ensuring, we're converting early warning into early action at the community level. Next slide. This is just an example of some of the work that we do with our communities, working with our national disaster offices, other humanitarian actors, other first responders, such as the police, fire service, etc. Bringing that hands-on training and understanding of hazard at the community level, and ensuring that we are positioning the community to be better able to respond to emergencies. Same here, just looking at some of the work that we are doing in terms of not just promoting early warning and alerting, but also taking that next step into what we commonly refer to as anticipatory action, or you may hear the term early action, which is ensuring that once these messages are issued, there are mechanisms that we are activating to take action prior to the impact of the emergency. So that, of course, ultimately we are saving lives, but reducing the impact also on the community, ultimately. Next slide. Right. So I know you touched on early warning systems before. So it's a global initiative launched by the UN Secretary General in 2022. Next slide. That we have been actively working on. The Caribbean did its own launch in February of last year. The IFRC, next slide, is heavily involved in this process because the initiative is focused on a 4-pillar approach. What we call the disaster risk knowledge, the detection, monitoring, observation, which is more the scientific base and gathering of information. Then, of course, the warning, dissemination, and communication. That's, how do we get that message out there? And ultimately, the preparedness for responding to the messages. IFRC leads on pillar 4, being able to get that, being able to take action for those messages, so the preparedness and the response side. But you have a host of other global partners that are involved in this process. Currently, under the initiative, next slide, we have 30 countries that have been prioritized globally for implementation. Next slide, please. But there are 6 countries in the Americas that are part of these 30 prioritized countries. 4 of them being in the Caribbean. So that's Guyana, Haiti, Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda. Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, and Haiti started November, December last year in terms of initiating national consultation processes with various stakeholders to sort of take an internal look on where they are when it comes to early warning and what direction do they need to go. So the aim of this is that they go through this process of identifying where their gaps are, develop implementation plan to form part of a wider global action for generating projects and so on at the country level to improve our early warning status. Ultimately, with the Secretary General's aim of ensuring that within 5 years, we're able to ensure that every person on Earth is covered by early warning. It's very ambitious because we're not looking at any single hazard, and it's a process that we're still looking at refining in how we're going to measure success. There's so many hazards out there. Are we measuring success by being able to ensure that if there's 100 hazards being impacted by this community, for argument's sake, that our measure of success is that we're able to provide early one for all 100 hazards. It's difficult because you do have some hazards that early warnings is little or none. For example, an earthquake. So we are very mindful of these kind of nuances and challenges with this ambition, but certainly is going full speed ahead with our partners, working with the government to accomplish this goal. Some of the challenges and capacity building issues that arise out of this process, of course, limited coordination across government, humanitarian actors, media, and the service providers, and the host of other partners that need to be involved in this kind of process, right? From identifying and sharing information about the hazard all the way to ensuring that there's effective communication of warnings and the ability of the communities to respond. Other areas such as understanding that every community has, some sort of capacity and are not necessarily helpless, so to speak, and we can utilize the traditional knowledge and the capacities within those communities to ensure a better response and reduce impact on hazards. Next slide. Of course, from the alerting message and PAPI perspectives, ensuring that all alerts, alert and early warning messages can be understood by everyone. And of course, messages must be actionable, right? Typically, we get messages from our alerting authorities, and it simply tells you that something is going to happen, but not often enough gives us sufficient information for us to be able to take action, and an action that will either save lives or reduce impacts. And so that's something that we constantly have to be mindful of and continue to work with our partners on. Of course, the systemic review of messages to ensure relevance and appropriateness for different interest groups, for persons with disabilities, and sure, that general inclusion across the board. And of course, to ensure that the language is clear and understood. And whilst I touch on language as well, not just clear and understood, but also we're in certainly a big global environment now. We hear this every day in all spheres of development. So a country like Jamaica, that's primarily, not primarily, that's English speaking. We do have visitors from across the globe and so on. And so it's important that when we push messages, especially across platforms that are easily convertible to other languages, such as our smartphones, that the formatting of that messages and so on, of those messages and so on, has the ability to give different languages as an output so that they can understand and respond appropriately. Next slide. Diversity in vulnerability, needs, and culture, a big thing certainly for us as a movement. All right, some communities have indigenous cultural practices and languages that must be considered in how we implement early warning systems in these local areas, and of course, ensure we are engaging the communities. A few years ago, part of the disaster risk reduction thrust was a sort of a language that said nothing for us, without us, as a slogan, meaning the people at the community level don't want us to just impose on them and services without their involvement as to what's best for them as a community, and how appropriate it may be in terms of them being able to understand and react to those messages. Right? Vulnerability, whilst across many countries in the Caribbean, varying scale and complexity. A lot of things are common, but there are many nuances at the community level that still has to be considered. Certainly from our perspective, working with our volunteers in the communities with other civil society organizations. And of course, local knowledge and participation is vital to ensuring our success and ensuring that we're addressing the specific needs of our communities. Some key takeaways that I want for us to really consider. National societies in terms of the Red Cross involvement in early warning and alerting, is that national societies are already playing our role as it relates to early warning systems in our countries. We will continue to be that active voice in the communities, not just in the what now and PAPE process, but like what we're doing now with the early warning for all and our continued engagement in building community disaster risk management groups, working with our governments and other humanitarian actors. Early warning does not necessarily translate into, as I said before, what we may call anticipatory action or early action. And this is definitely something that we will continue to advocate for, continue to ensure is included in our own direct involvement in community, that translation is happening. We're getting a warning, but what is the specific actionable things that needs to happen, and how do we as a national society, working with the government and other humanitarian actors, facilitate the community's ability to take action? Part of that process is the third point, which is early action protocols and plans to be implemented in all countries, whether it be from the national level or at different levels within various communities that are highly vulnerable. But certainly this is needed to complement and supplement alerting and early warning messaging. There are some key resource points that can be utilized. These are public sites. Jamaica specifically has its own emergency alerting source that was recently launched by the Jamaica Met Office. But the movement has several points of interest, such as our Caribbean Disaster Reference Center, which is managed out of Trinidad and Tobago. We have our website that has the PAPE messaging that can be used not just by all national societies, but for other humanitarian organizations as well, in working in country to tailor messages for communities. We have the What Now service and other IFRC PAPE tools back it. And there are some specific websites that supports this as well, such as our Alert Hub, our early warning platform, dedicated website, or forecast-based financing website that also looks at early warning, being able to translate early warning into action through forecasting finances, right? Which is pretty much from the alerts that are issued by the warning authorities, ensuring that there is a mechanism, such as the Red Cross or other organizations, can trigger financial resources to support the communities in responding to emergencies. Right? So I can't leave without reiterating our point from our Secretary General at the global level that we believe that no one should suffer from predictable hazards, right? Because of course there's evidence across the globe that tells us, that early warning undoubtedly reduce the impacts and save lives, right? So I just want to reiterate that point. So I think that should be my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for most informative presentation. I think it would be comforting for journalists to know that through the Common Alerting Protocol, IFRC and its stakeholders practice a level of journalism, because all of the key questions in the CAP our first questions when journalists are confronted: who, what, why, when, how, etc. And I think that captures that. But I have before Chris comes, I have a question, because IFRC, as I said in introducing you, is really one of the great institutions on the planet. And I think
Thank you.
I followed IFRC. In fact, I think I said in an earlier thing, it's the one institution that I contribute financially to on a regular basis. It fell flat for some reason, we weren't as much in touch. But in following the work that IFRC does, I recognize that there are instances, many instances. There's one significant situation now unfolding in the Middle East. IFRC is coming up against all kinds of forces.
Yes.
At a lower level or a different level in the Caribbean, because your work is overlapping with a lot of what official agencies, NGOs, CSOs, and other organizations and other groups of people are doing. How does IFRC contend with that? And what are the dynamics that go behind that? What is a complicated arrangement?
Extremely complicated. So you get the sense competitors, the UN system, the governments, humanitarian organization, but we're all here to accomplish the same goal: safer communities and saving lives of vulnerable people in emergencies. It's a difficult situation. So, for example, we spoke heavily, myself, the previous presenter, about the Disaster Management Office that has an official mandate and responsibility for ensuring the safety of citizens and response overall to emergencies. But one of the uniqueness with the movement and with National Red Cross societies is that they are created by acts of parliament by virtue of the governments being part of the Geneva Convention. And so there is a strong footing in country, but a responsibility not for us to act on behalf of the government, but to be a support to the various programs and so on that are implemented. So a big part of what we have to be doing is advocacy and coaching with the various government organizations about, that we are here to support these various mechanisms that are in place in identification of hazards, in responding to emergencies, in looking at social protection for vulnerable groups. And so it is the advocacy and coordination and engagement with all these various players. Sometimes it's a tussle because of the competing mandates and priorities, but we do find space quite often to work and coordinate with each other.
Creative tensions, I suppose.
Yes.
From time to time. Chris, you have a question?
If the Met Service announced that it's going to be raining in Bull Bay,
yes,
and the Hope River, people living in the vicinity of the Hope River need to evacuate. Who sends that message? What I want to understand is that Met Service says that, ODPEM sends out something. Where does your organization and your messaging fit into the landscape?
Right. So our organization and messaging is now at the lower level. So our messaging is going across our staff and volunteers, because we have volunteers across the country, and them being able to communicate with our community emergency groups that have been established and so on. So it's not necessarily something that you're going to see published out there as a Red Cross messages. But there are instances as well that we do work with the governments. So this varies across the country and who are the alerting authorities and the different laws that they may have, because there are some countries that allows the Red Cross to actually broadcast the messages on via text messaging, etc. But there are others that we don't want to bring much confusion as to who is the alerting authority. So we simply, within our network of the Red Cross, promulgate that message to be able to reach as far as we can at the community level. I hope that answers. No, I would say no off the bat is more complementary because ODPEM, we Red Cross, say again? No, ODPEM send the messages to us. They are the alerting authority. So what you may find is some message may emanate directly from who is monitoring and detecting that hazard, which is in Jamaica's case, the Met Service for weather and climate related events. The national alerting entity, separate from the warning, is the disaster office, ODPEM. So ODPEM would then be the ones that send us the messaging. And then we help to spread that message across the country to communities and other humanitarian actors.
Yes, I have two questions. My name's Emma Lewis. I'm a blogger. Quickly, do you do any training targeting specifically for the media in terms of emergency response? And I know you do CPR and things like that. Yeah. So I wondered if that is something that you do. Secondly, there is a bit of a refugee situation in the Caribbean. I'm not sure if that really qualifies as a crisis, or it may at some point a crisis or an emergency, but it's a humanitarian issue. And we have some Haitian asylum seekers who've been here since last August, and they are in a place that's heavily guarded and separated from the rest of us. And I wondered if that is a situation where the Red Cross would be helping, as they're very much isolated and they've been there for a long time, waiting for their asylum to be processed.
In St. Mary, yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for those two questions. So yes, the Jamaica Red Cross is heavily involved in that process for two reasons. One is by virtue of the work that we do as humanitarian actors, but also we are a part of the government has what is called a humanitarian assistance committee led by the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. But we are very much a part of group at the national level. And so from the very day those patients arrived in country, we have been working closely with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So as I think Trevor said, yeah, we practically live at that facility to ensure that their basic humanitarian needs are met on a daily basis.
Okay, before Lazina, there's also a role with respect to international humanitarian law for ICRC.
Yes.
Yeah, which we shouldn't confuse with IFRC and the work that they do. So Lazina,
yeah, ICRC is their primary role is in areas where there's conflict.
Yeah.
So they have a heavy interest in like a refugee or so on situation, but because there's any conflict here in Jamaica, the primary coordination with the National Society would be IFRC. But certainly we would be working very closely with the ICRC, which is the International Committee for the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society.
Because the source country circumstances will be different from the receiving country. Lazina,
your first question about whether we do media training. So we don't have a specific media training program, but from time to time we do have different occasions where we do engage the media for training, for it's just exchange of information. A good platform that we have been trying to do this for a few years now is what we an event we have annually prior to the hurricane season called our pre-hurricane conference. For the last 3 years we have been doing it online, and that's 1 year as well that we engage the media. We have we try to have a session in that each year to share with the media on what we do and how they can help in an emergency. This year, it's scheduled for April. If my memory serves me right, it's the 23rd to the 25th. It's 3 days for this year. But certainly, it's been planned now in terms of the whole process and speakers and so on. Once that is finalized, it will be broadcast on our social media pages and website.
Okay. Next, then we're going to take Jacob online, and then Robin, and then we'll come. Right?
Lazina Yearwood, the newsroom. My question is basically out of curiosity, because there was mention of community engagement for Indigenous communities. The reason I want to ask this question is because we as journalists ourselves have an issue where, well, a challenge. We cannot, even if you get into an Indigenous community, which are very closed off and to themselves, there aren't really many persons in those communities who speak English. They speak their Indigenous or tribe language. So how do you, tackle that barrier there?
It is a significant challenge. But one of the uniqueness with the Red Cross on this is that because we are 191 countries, the national society in question has that sort of a challenge. At least there's support that can come through the federation from another country that speaks the language. We may deploy someone in country to assist them in the process, as well as, persons know and trust the Red Cross by virtue of what they see and hear the Red Cross does globally. And so sometimes they are more receptive of Red Cross coming in, learning and understanding this system, the culture, and be able to assist them. Right. So from that perspective, it's a little less challenging for us as a movement, for other government entities, and even sometimes the media is seen as, political, so to speak. But certainly our reach across other national societies who may either speak the language or be familiar with the kind of culture, and we're able to utilize those resources in a particular country. So that helps us in that process. Sure.
Okay, sorry about that, Lazina. Sorry. Okay, Robin, you go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Right. My question is, I'm aware that the Red Cross has been doing some work with the community of Old Harbor.
Yeah.
Right, it's a vulnerable community, a fishing village close by. To what extent have you used the CAP or any of the other alert systems you have in place?
Okay.
With that particular community.
Right. In that particular community, it's a utilization of CAP generally in Jamaica is relatively new. So again, we aren't the users and authorities in terms of pushing the messages. So again, we're going to be relying and have been relying heavily on the Met Service and the ODPEM, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. So where they have issued alerts with our volunteers on the ground, as well as through our social media and websites, we push those set messages through those platforms. We aren't creative of alerts, alert messaging.
Okay, Lazina, a quick follow-up, and then
right. So I give you an example. There were several tsunami messaging that are, because as Alison mentioned, Old Harbor Bay is one of the only tsunami-ready community for Jamaica. And what happened in that situation is messages were received from the ODPEM. It was broadcast to our volunteers in the parish, as well as staff, and we in turn aided with the community disaster response team in spreading that message in the community. And we're a part of various drills and so on that they conduct. That is the National Disaster Office conduct from time to time.
Okay. Lazina, a quick follow-up, then Jacob, and then we'll close. Last question, this gentleman here, whose name I forgot. Sorry.
Right. My follow-up is basically just because, you know, you mentioned that you have persons who are from different areas that would be able to then step in. What I want to know is, you know, most of these tribes in Guyana specifically, they are very small populations. So one, we had a recent issue where some researchers came and they were trying to get some information, but they didn't have persons available to assist them. So do you people do you guys step in this in these types of situations, and how do you step in again? Because again, the interpreter situation, it's not just I'm not saying that what you're saying is not true, but I'm just saying it's very hard to
I can
tackle.
say it has been challenging for us in Guyana and Suriname as well, because as you mentioned, there are some smaller indigenous groups that you may not have that language anywhere else in the region or even globally. So we do have that challenge at times as well, certainly in those two countries. Part of the way in which we try to address that is, you know, a constant engagement with the community and trying to either learn the language somewhat or be, you know, some of them do speak a little bit of English, broken English, and if we're able to recruit them as volunteers that help us to work with that community and with other indigenous groups. So that's the approach that we have to take in terms of ensuring that we are inclusive enough where even the indigenous groups we are recruiting as part of our volunteer pool.
And I would assume that Toshas will have a huge role in facilitating that, because you know what happens in those villages, right?
I must say, in some instances, we'll be willing to help researchers, but that can be challenging because, of course, we as a movement want to ensure that what kind of research it is, who is financing ultimately this research and the intent of it, because our reputation is going to be on the line if we are there facilitating certain kinds of research being done and so on. So we may be able to assist, but would be very cautious in doing so.
Okay, Jacob, you have to be very quick. We're going to start wrapping up, Jacob, and then.
Okay. Yes, thanks for the opportunity. This got my attention as one in the disaster management office, and especially person who have been in charge of communication since 2011. I am heavily concerned about the gap that exists, especially between communication and the media. If you would have seen in the presentation you made, you mentioned the CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. Have we ever thought of Community Emergency Communications Team? Communication is always assumed, but never structured and never set up to have a foundation. And the media is always, disaster risk reduction is not necessarily the primary function of all the media houses. So that is why in most cases, they are always present at the time of crisis, which put them in a reactive end than proactive. And when they come, it's more of the newsworthiness of the situation as opposed to the holistic aspect of risk management, where it starts before, during, and after. So the concern about it is establishing that purposeful community involvement in them being properly trained on communication itself, including even media personnel, because I've been in a case where a media person was to cover tsunami Carib wave, and they wrote it as tidal wave. That was completely misleading, and that was the headline news, tidal wave exercise. So we've been facing this for more than 10 years. I really just want a case where you can, I want to hear a suggestion on how we can set that platform where media practitioners are involved in risk reduction training, and those community first responders are also involved, trained specifically to play the role of communication, not just a one topic aspect, but something where they could even be certified as they are certified in other risk aspects. And secondly, the need for marketing. Because if we look at Maslow's theory, safety is at the bottom, while self-actualization is right at the top. So in as much as we bring all the importance of this, how well is it marketed, where the common man, the youth, the children could be captivated in that aspect of it. So if not, it will just be something that ends with us as journalists and as disaster practitioners, but the common man still knows of it only when adverse event occurs. So I want to get your take on that.
Okay, Jacob, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll do my best. I mean, I too was a little bit concerned, and especially when I was hearing some of the questions from our Jamaican colleagues here, because I was a part of the process with Alison Broom as early as 2011. Right? Well, she wasn't with the organization at that time. That's as early as when Jamaica started to look at tsunami warning and structuring the various plans and standard operating procedures. It's difficult, and it has to be tackled from many fronts. Certainly one of the areas in which we are tackling this, we have a Jamaica Red Cross representative here in a workshop such as this, and also participating as a facilitator myself. You know, is finding these different forums of being able to share what we do, and you know, being able to that trusted face at times. Persons who know who they can refer to for certain information, and who also can provide reliable information. Various mechanisms do exist within the different countries in terms of disaster response, but I think more needs to be done, certainly from the government authorities and other humanitarian actors, in terms of, you know, really utilizing those platforms for better coordination of pre-disaster events and pre-disaster coordination. They activate, as you mentioned, readily when a disaster or emergency strikes. But those said platforms, for example, in Jamaica, there is what is called parish disaster committees, which are local disaster risk management committees that are intended to have the media, intended to have a Red Cross and other actors participate in monthly meetings about disaster management, how to prepare, how to provide support and messaging to communities. But quite often we are absent from that process. Absent not because we mean to, but sometimes we are unaware that these processes are happening, or unaware that we ought to be a part of the process in terms of the various instruments and so on that create these structures. So I certainly would encourage us reaching out more to our stakeholders, the disaster office, the alerting entities such as our meteorological service and others, and how we can participate in these things, including even simulation exercises. Quite often, as the person who spoke, Jacob, I think, mentioned that media is involved, but about speaking about the event from a newsworthy standpoint, and not heavily involved in the actual processes that are involved, activation, in warning the communities and so on. Definitely, I think as humanitarian actors and as government authorities doing disaster response and management, that certainly can be improved in that regard.
Right. Ursula Charles Jr., St. John's, Antigua. Two very, very quick questions. I understand Jacob's concern about who we should ask questions and if that person is trained, but my question is, what are you allowed to tell us? If we ask how many people you found dead in the community, are you allowed to tell us the state of devastation, etc.? Can you tell us that? And two, in some countries, the Red Cross, Red Crescent has been accused of, siphoning off aid that's meant for the people. What internal processes do you have in place to ensure that you not only give account to your donor agencies, but to the people on the ground?
Okay, thank you very much. So there are many processes involved in this for the Red Cross movement. So there are dedicated audit and accountability hotlines that persons, once these things, they become aware of these things, can call directly from the Geneva office, regional office, outside of the National Society itself, that those contacts can be made. Also, for every funding that is provided to a national society, there is audit and monitoring of financing from within that national society to the cluster office, to the regional office, all the way to Geneva. Yes, things may happen and fall through the cracks. So part of that process, and there may be a few countries that you are aware of that is, having some of these challenges now. Part of that process is that they are called to account and they have to report on these matters all the way to Geneva, or the IFRC gets involved in country working with the government to resolve those situations with the national governments as well, to ensure that there's proper and detailed audit of the process. And of course, that the IFRC and the national authority does not hold back where persons are found wanting for them to, if they need to be accountable legally, then they are brought to the books. Forgive me, I forgot your first question.
What are you allowed to tell us? Information you're allowed to share with the media?
Right. Yeah. So the quick answer to that is we are allowed to tell you anything that we have verified. So if we have volunteers or staff in the field and have first-hand information about what's happening in the field, we can give you that. If we have trusted information coming from other humanitarian actors or trusted governments such as the disaster office or so on, we can share that as well. So the short answer, anything we can verify, we can share. We don't share information that we as a society cannot verify.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very stimulating presentation and for your responses. The accountability. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to Horace's response, especially about the accountability. The IFRC also has a compliance and mediation committee and also an integrity line. So it encourages people to report if they see or think or know of, anything that is happening that is not supposed to be happening. So it's encouraging that level of transparency and accountability as well, and reporting with confidentiality, knowing that it won't come back to, in a form of way to hurt you. But there are different mechanisms in place, and certainly the compliance and mediation committee, they're very, very keen on ensuring that they investigate the necessary complaints and do their due diligence as well.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification, but I wanted to applaud the original question because it points to the fact that the journalism does not end at the point of lending support in terms of dissemination, because every stakeholder with whom we interact should be subject to the same quality and level of journalistic scrutiny. So questions of accountability and so on would naturally arise. So thanks for that question, very important question.
Thanks again, everyone.
Horace, thanks again.
Thanks to the team for inviting us. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Now we weren't the most disciplined with our time management. I'll take the hit for that. But at some point, and perhaps we'll pick it up tomorrow, we wanted us very briefly take a look at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, IOC UNESCO, and that speaks specifically to the question of our marine environment. And just one, in terms of areas of journalistic coverage related to that, is SDG 14, which looks at life under the ocean. So tomorrow we'll spend a little more time looking at that, whether in passing or in greater detail. Not sure whether we'll get a chance, but I think that it's an expectation. And one of the outcomes from this would be some kind of discussion on that. So Kiran, if you want to make any closing remarks.
No, I think we had a great second day. Thank you all for your participation and engagement. Tomorrow, our sessions start at 9. We will finish at around 11:30. For those of us here, we will have lunch again before we have 2 panel discussions. The second, one panel discussion, sorry, and 1 roundtable discussion. The roundtable discussion tomorrow is something I'd like you all to think about a little bit, both our online participants and in room. We're going to talk about some of the outcomes and the learning over these days and talk about what the next steps could be for us to work together. And that some of you asked about the risk assessment as one of the things and so on, but we really want to see how we can pull all of this together to move forward in a meaningful way. So think about that tonight when you're having dinner or looking at Ancient Aliens or whatever you'll do on a Friday night. I'll see you all in the morning, so get home safely, everyone. Thank you.